Welcome to episode number 37 of the National Land Realty Podcast, where we discuss all things land. Our goal here is to inform, educate, and entertain those of you who own land or are interested in the buying and selling of land throughout the United States. My name is Mac Christian, and I am the Chief Marketing Officer here at National Land Realty. I'll be your host for this episode. In this episode, I'm talking with land professional Nicholas Ardis from South Carolina. Nicholas has a background in global finance, and it has paid dividends, no pun intended, in the level of knowledge he is able to provide for his clients. Nicholas is here to discuss the types of land improvements that landowners should make in order to maximize the value of their land. Now, these improvements can be made whether you are selling your land or holding it for your own enjoyment. Now sit back and enjoy. I'm sitting here with Nicholas Ardis, and Nicholas, you're out of South Carolina. I keep on trying to say Mississippi to you, but no, you're out of South Carolina, and you started with National Land Realty in 2015. Is that right?
Very late 15, early 2016. My effective start date, 100%, was literally January 1st of 16, and came over from the financial world, doing international currency hedging for a little while right out of college, and wasn't the right fit on that side of things, and jumped over. I always thought about adding real estate on as a triple major in college, but never did. And figured after the first major didn't work out that well, and to jump over, bring what I could into it, and come over to the land side.
Yeah. So you start out with finance and global supply chain, and then you move into selling hunting land.
Yep. Always done a lot outdoors. Enjoyed being outside and being on friends' farms, hunting, fishing, all that when I could when I was younger. And so I thought about the real estate aspect, which was all the cognates rolling over into the finance degree overall, and just never pulled that trigger. And then figured out that right afterwards, I might as well give it a shot, and found Logan on National Land and jumped over. Hadn't really looked back since.
So that's a pretty unique background. I mean, I talk to a lot of agents, and there's not many that have a background like this. How has that helped you as you've gone into land real estate?
I feel like it's helped a lot from the aspect of being able to really kind of connect with people and realize that there's more to it. A lot of people say they're not buying a property as an investment, but inherently it is. Anybody that buys, and then whether they think they're going to sell or not, eventually that property is going to get sold. And so that is an investment just by the inherent nature. So it's been great to be able to kind of pull that over. And it makes it kind of tough sometimes too, because some people can get a little too caught up in the investment aspect and kind of forget what they're actually trying to do and can't see the forest for the trees, so to speak. So let some of that get into their decision-making process maybe a little bit too much, especially if the plan is going to be more of a legacy type property where it's going to be handed down. They're going to have the time to overcome if it was a bad purchase or things of that nature. So it's gotten interesting on some of those, but being able to really break into the finances and tell somebody sometimes they need to hear it, hey, maybe this isn't the one for you. Maybe it's a little too much, and I'd love for you to get it, but it's probably not going to be the best one. Get a smaller one. Let's work with that for a little bit and then come back to it later on. We can go into a 1031 exchange, move it over. You might just hit the lottery in the meantime, have a little bit extra cash there, and still want to keep that first property. So it's just been good being able to bring that side of things in and somewhat speculate a little bit in different areas of what's going to grow, what's not going to grow, how to make it grow faster. So that's been all fun stuff, and looking at the investment side, and a lot we're talking about today being how you can improve a property and what that can do for your values, whether you're necessarily doing it to sell immediately, to sell in a short term, or hold forever is still going to be a value added. And then what you can do from there with borrowing against property, pledging as collateral if you need to, or just being able to further enjoy your own property.
Yeah. So it sounds like what you've been able to do is go in and talk to, potential land buyers or sellers, right? And really have that sort of return on investment conversation of, are you picturing a return? How long do you anticipate that return to be? How long are you going to hold it? If it is going to be multi-generational, you still want to factor that in because, no kid wants to get handed junky land from their parents, right? So like you want to be able to like have that succession there and be able to just let them know what that land's going to do as far as value wise over the years, right?
Right. Definitely. And what kind of return are you looking for? Is it strictly monetary, or is an enjoyment aspect of it all you really need? And that self-fulfillment, satisfaction from seeing your son, daughter, grandson, granddaughter, whoever it is, kill the first deer or turkey, catch first fish, whatever that case may be. It's not always a strictly monetary value or appreciation. It's a self-fulfillment and a personal satisfaction.
You know, and that doesn't get discussed a lot, is the return on investment that you receive from just the use of the land, right? Like your enjoyment of it. And that's an important conversation to have, right? And because you can't quantify it, but you do have to consider it, right?
Exactly. And it gets tough because a lot want it to be able to quantify it and see it on a spreadsheet. And that's something that you really can't, and may, kind of wish you hadn't done it. But then when it happens, it's very satisfying. Everybody's like, yeah, I'm glad this happened. And then want to continue to see it grow from there.
Yeah, we had that conversation. We had a fishing trip a while back, and we had to go fish on ladders in freezing weather, and we drove like 6 hours down there, and we caught our first fish, and we had like a little break on the side. Like, okay, was it worth it? Yeah, it was worth it. It was good. Like you get that one piece of enjoyment out of something, and like all the work that leads up to it can make it, make it worthwhile.
Oh, yeah.
So we're here to kind of talk about the improvements that you can make to land, and originally I was assuming that it would be more on people looking to sell, but that's not necessarily the case. What we're talking about is improvements that you can make over the long term, that you are handing down that enjoyment factor, whether you're looking to flip, and then you've kind of broken this down on how you work with people according to their goals. So talk to me a little bit about how you sort of identify goals with clients and what those usually are.
The easiest thing at the beginning is to simply ask that question straight up. Most foresters are going to do the same thing. Any strict land consultant that's going to help you manage for whitetail or turkey, quail, whatever it is, it's what's the objective. And so when somebody can start thinking about it from what is my true goal with it, is it 100% investment from a dollar sense? Is it family use as well from the personal satisfaction and enjoyment aspect? Is it going to 100% be a timber tract and you don't hunt, don't care about hunting? What else could you do with it? Is it going to be a short-term goal that you're just trying to flip it to be able to jump to another property? Or is it going to be something that you want to buy and create a legacy out of for kids, grandkids, great-grandkids, however long you want to go? So the easiest thing really is asking that objective at the beginning. And same thing on the selling side. I tell a lot of people, and told several last week that asked me about it. We're kind of on the fence, and I kind of surprised them, I think, and said, personally, I wouldn't sell it. You don't need to. You're not going to, most likely, where your number is. But if you don't need to, don't. But here's some things you could do that whenever you do go to sell it, or leave it to somebody else, if they want the cash and they need to get out of it, what could you have done that will help at that point? Because then said inherently, it still is an investment, no matter what that use is going to be. And so then once you figure out if it's going to be a short term versus a long term, there's different ways to break it down, because on the short term, it's more of just kind of putting lipstick on a pig, so to speak. Get it a little bit easier for people to get around the track, see some improvement, and realize that they don't have to buy it and then immediately put more money into it. The basic things are already there as they need it, and can buy it and go hunt right after the closing. If it's going to be more of a long term, it's looking into what some of those costs are going to be and how they can plan it out over time to make the best use out of it.
Yeah, and I want to sort of just dive in here real quick to something you just said. Was you were talking about you talked to multiple landowners in the last little bit, and you're taking the true approach of a consultant, where, and I just want to clarify for anybody listening, you're first and foremost a real estate agent, and you're going into a deal where that's, your income comes from facilitating the buying and selling of land, right? And you're going into people that are looking at selling and telling them not to, which is essentially not doing business, but you're acting as a true consultant. And I just want, so it's more of an ethics thing, right? And I just wanted to make sure to highlight that, okay, so you're acting against your own business interest to make sure that somebody makes the right decision for their land.
And it usually surprises them. It's one that they usually will say exactly what you just said there. Kind of, isn't it your job to sell it? And, well, yeah, it is, but it's also a big thing to me. The sales aspects always come easy, mainly because I don't really try to sell anything. At the end of the day, buyers are going to buy and sellers are going to sell. So if we get a good relationship, I'm going to end up, from the real estate perspective, being just fine because they know I was honest with them and didn't force them into something. So when their friend or their cousin or whoever mentions they might want to sell some property, hey, you need to call Nick. So it will work itself out in the long run. Plus, all but guarantee that I'll get those too whenever that time arises, or even just helping with the valuations. If something happens to that owner and they're leaving it to somebody, can kind of help on an evaluation and understand and have already seen the property, know the property. This really helps on many different facets.
Yeah, it's kind of a unique piece of how the land industry is, because it's not like anybody goes and hops on Google one day and sees an ad and says, "Oh, that's a great ad. I'm going to sell 1,000 acres." It doesn't work like that. People sell when they're ready to sell, and they buy when they're ready to buy. And it's the job of a consultant to have those relationships in place for when that happens, and to have that trust built, and make sure that you've given them the right advice along the way, because just the way the land works, you might give advice to a piece of land over a 10-year period and eventually work with them. But in the meantime, you've helped them improve their station with their land, and improve that. So it's a unique sort of business model that it is. And I appreciate that you're going about it from the approach of a consultant.
And at the beginning, I didn't really think about it quite as much that way, and probably didn't know as much about it as I do now. But I'm selling a couple right now that they bought with zero intention of reselling, and things have changed, and now they've come back. And in the meantime, they have done some improvements, and for those specific ones, the market also was a lot better than it was when they purchased. So they've got overall market growth, plus the work that they've put into the property is really helping. And it also will still help on the securing listings aspect. I've got one that hadn't heard from in a while, and finally got back on the phone with him, and he's trying to get some stuff done to it, but didn't have any of the contacts. And I said, "Oh, well, here you go," and gave him about 3 different contacts to solve the problem that he had. And now we're getting those things done, hopefully this week, if the weather will cooperate with the burning, getting everything started to be able to put that up on the market.
Yeah, and with what we're talking about here too is, for the last 2-3 years, the market was on fire, and, land sold and appreciated at a level that, nobody's ever seen. And, maybe the run up to the 2006, right? But like the run on land and real estate in the last few years has been just on fire is the best thing I can come up with. I don't have any other great words for that. But where now heading into 2023, there's a lot of things, people are worried about the economy, people are worried about recession, people are worried about interest rates, and the market's cooling a little bit as far as that appreciation value. And now those improvements that you make to the land are much more valuable to what you do overall. You used to be able, the last 3 years, you could hold on to a chunk of land, do nothing, sell it, make money, and walk on. And now you got to do the work. And where, you have to seek out how you can add something to the land that increases value. So yeah, tell me a little bit, start with telling me, if someone, we're going to call it like a flipper, right? Somebody looking to make a short-term investment in a piece of land, what are some improvements that they can look to make? And what do you look at first when you go to look at that land, with a buyer?
Number one thing is going to be accessibility around the track. Can you get to the far corners of the property, really, no matter the size? How accessible is the majority of the property, especially if there's a creek in the rear or cutting through the property, any focal point that most people are going to want on a property, which generally is water. But can you get to those areas easily and be able to recreate around those, utilize those different different features, whether it's a great hardwood stand that you could thin out the understory for a great food plot, dropping acorns, or just getting to a little bit of an open area that could just be bush hogged and have a food plot immediately. Certain properties, if they're going to be doing it more of a home site aspect, can be sub 20 acres or so, having that area for a house already prepared, about a 3/4 of an acre cleared out, de-stumped, ready to put a house on immediately. Great to go on and have septic tests done. In South Carolina, I've been really backed up on that for the last couple years. So being able to have that already taken care of, so when a buyer calls, survey's done, septic's done, access is good, they can get into the property, see it easily, and then at that point we aren't having to wait several weeks or months on DHEC or another testing group to come make sure the soil's good. You can immediately push through all of that and have a short-term closing, as opposed to waiting 3, 4, 5 months on a closing because they have to wait on DHEC to come do the septic, and they can't do the septic test until there's been a survey. And so all of these different things that add up on the closing term that allow you to, one, get a higher value because it's done. A buyer's not going to have to go in and do those things to it. They're immediately able to purchase, and if they won't, they can start breaking ground that day. It makes it real easy to jump in, and to having all of those things makes it really easy to turn that time frame around.
So those are, and I mentioned from working with a buyer, because I was thinking about short-term investment where somebody comes in and they're like, I want to hold this for a little bit and I want to flip it in a couple of years, and do it that way. But everything that you just said also would pertain to somebody who's looking to sell land and maybe hasn't held it all that long, or even your long-term, landholders that are looking to sell. Is if you can put in that legwork and get like a home site surveyed and get the septic test done, because you said there's like a 3-4 month backlog on that?
At one point, yes. It's gotten a little quicker now, but to me, it's if you're immediately looking to flip it, it's just going to be a short-term flip or investment. You're automatically a seller. You're going into it with a seller's mindset. What am I going to get out of this property when we get to sell it? Not just what can I buy it for. And the investment's made at the beginning when you make the purchase, because that's your bottom line at that point. Anything to make money has to be higher than that. But so you're immediately thinking about the sale before you can make the investment in the beginning. Because otherwise, if you buy it too high, it's not going to work. If there's not enough you can do to improve it to get the higher value on the sale, it's not going to work. So you got to be thinking as a seller, even though you're on the buying side. And if I'm working with buyers that are going to be flipping, and they know that that is their only intent, go on and get that survey done at the beginning. Try to get a seller to pay for it if they will. Even if they won't, it's something that we're going to need. So even if it's a 100-acre tract, I want to split into smaller pieces and use scale in addition to some of these other things. We're going to go on and get the septics done at the beginning, because we need to, one, make sure that they will pass before flipping it out afterwards. And it's just time that we can immediately, if we have all those things done, we have the survey done, we have the septic done, then we can just go in, make clearings, do whatever we need to do, and it's ready to go back on the market. So it's bringing that turnaround time down tremendously, because we're using the beginning purchase to get everything, the big stuff we need done. So we're essentially using somebody else's time and then being able to capitalize on it much quicker once we have purchased, done whatever we're going to do, and get it sold back out.
Yeah, and it's just similar to, I just did a podcast on commercial development and looking at the possibility of rezoning, right? Where if you're on the outskirts of a metropolitan area and you just want to sell land, well, if there's a long-term plan in your area, you can upzone to commercial or something else, and then your value per acre at that point is drastically increased. And it's sort of the same process where you want to go through that pre-evaluation stage where you're setting up the next buyer for success and they know what they're getting, as opposed to buying just blank land and hoping for the best. Like, in commercial, you want to check for underground water and stuff like that, and pathways to access. And this is similar to where, like, you want to make sure that your septic's okay. You want to make sure that there's, good access to all the points in the property that somebody would want to access. And you have a specific strategy for roads that I thought was interesting, that you had labeled out, that something that a few things that you like to keep in mind for access roads. I was wondering if you could go into that a little bit.
Yeah. So the big thing, and a lot of it depends on the size of a tract, but to be able to show all those points, whether it's a stream or nice hardwood grove, things of that nature. It's best if you can make it a loop road. So the majority of it is pulled back to one entry point. You can have multiple, but if you pull it back to one, making one sweeping loop around a property or things of that nature, it makes it to where when you're showing property, it's giving much more of an adventure, so to speak, with a buyer. They're not seeing the same thing twice, going down one road, hit a turnaround, and come back. We've already seen that. So if you make it on a loop road or very large spokes, it gives more of a adventure feel, and you're able to see more of the property off of about the same amount of road that you could have done doing one center road and spokes coming off of it. Just allows you to get to the further points, and if you have to, culvert gets blown out off of a creek crossing or something of that nature, you've now got two ways to get there. It doesn't take your only one across. Now, yes, in that instance, you'd have to put two culverts in, but the chance of both of them blowing out is pretty slim. And if you do them both correctly in the first place, you will have either of them blow out, which is also another aspect of things. Do it right, do it light, as the football coaches used to say, or do it wrong, do it long. If you do it multiple times, it's going to end up costing more time and effort, money. Than if you just did it right and maybe cost a little bit more the first time, it'll really turn around and make it where you only do it once.
Yeah, you're talking about the loop, and one, being able to access all the way around, but two, being able to make a trip out of it. There was an agent of ours that just sold it's the largest piece of property ever sold by our company, was just sold this last year, and it was sort of an island kind of setup, and you had to go to it by boat, and there was one road, and that's it, and it went in, I think, 2 miles. And so to access, you had to go in 2 miles. Well, now you got to go 2 miles all the way back out. And so I think the statement was, it was miserable going in, but it was twice as miserable walking out of the thing, because you'd already seen all of it. Yeah. I think that's something you have to consider when you're looking at selling property, as far as how do people access it and how do they travel around it. And then those roads also act as a fire break, right? Like you're actually adding a feature of fire resistance to that property. Is that something that you want to consider as well, as how you're installing fire breaks?
Well, so in a lot of instances, you can get some cost share assistance on being able to put in fire breaks, but more than likely, you're not going to get any cost share assistance for putting in roads. So if you strictly put in a road, it is going to act as a fire break, because it is there's no growth on the ground, and it's usually beat in a little bit better, so you're not going to have fire jumping your break. So what a lot of folks will do is put in your fire breaks before you do any kind of burning, and then use that fire break as a road from there. So you essentially are using some money on a cost share level that allows you to put in that fire break, and then you're getting a road out of it. It just given a good dual purpose there, being able to access all around, plus help and just an overall security level too, on both burning. The worst thing you want to do is have it jump fire break and get into the neighbor's timber, or get to a section of yours that you don't want. That's once it's there, it's there. So having all the precautions that you can make it very, very good. And from a security aspect, again, I sold a pretty large tract a couple of years ago that the neighbor of the tract was a friend of the seller's, and he got his neighbor, every time it rained, that neighbor would run over to the property and just ride his four-wheeler around the property, around that one loop road on the edge. And all that did was, if anybody was going to try to trespass into that property, if they went out there at any point, they would think, geez, somebody's already been in here. It just rained 2 hours ago. Like, I don't want to come in here because I'm worried I'm going to get caught. So it helped from a trespassing level as well.
That's hilarious. I would never think about that.
They're beneficial all the way around.
So if you're going to do this, if you're going to build a fire break, what's the qualifying kind of parameters for building a fire break? So if you get the cost share with that, what qualifies as that so that you can build it? And I'm assuming the way that you do it is like you're building just a wider fire break so it can accommodate, a UTV or a car. Mm-hmm.
So I usually at that point leave it to somebody that does forestry. Them to allow, to help a buyer or seller, or just an owner at that point that's trying to do something. Let those that do that 100% for a living be the one that advises on that. I mean, because you can make it as wide as you want, or as skinny as you want. The skinnier you go, the higher chance of fire jumping or the road getting encroached on just by natural growth on the property. I would say 10, 15, 20 feet pretty easily. Plus, at the end of it, whether you crown your roads, so many different things you can do with the roads at that point, but whatever you do there then is still becoming an avenue for wildlife to go to use just as much. They're going to use the path of least resistance just as much as people are. So having that wider area is good to be able to help the wildlife. Plus, it helps sunlight get up under the understory for understory and mid-story kind of growth, depending on what your goals are. Again, with the property, is it strictly timber, is it wildlife? Being able to get that sunlight back in there usually is a good thing. Helps on moisture control. Just overall is good to have light reaching the floor.
Yeah, and then so those are, I mean, terrific tips for that short-term kind of use thing. What about sort of those that are getting into land? Maybe they have it and they just want to improve it for sort of long-term. You were mentioning personal enjoyment, and or somebody looking to buy and hold it, but they also what we were talking about before is it's no use to buy land and just sit on junky land. Like you want to improve it to maximize its value. So what do you look at in those instances, and are those different than your short-term sort of transactional buyers and sellers?
And they're pretty similar, because if you're selling it, you're looking at selling it quickly, you're on the purchasing side, you're going to sell it quickly versus you're going to hold it. Knowing what your cost going in is going to be good from your investment standpoint, but then do the same token, you being able to take your friends out or your family out to ride down to the river in the back of the property, or go hunt. If you have more roads, more accessibility, there's higher potential to be able to hunt more people on the same property at the same time safely. The wildlife are going to use it, like I said a minute ago, and making those avenues are going to be better for the wildlife because it makes it easier for them to get around a property. I guess one thing we hadn't quite mentioned is having everything 100% open is not always the best either from a wildlife perspective, because animals still are going to want security and have a good browse area close to where they're going to be bedding, where they're having water. So making all of those places easily accessible to them and to you is going to be of strong importance. On a much longer term, if you're buying a young timber tract and want to see it come all the way to maturity, 30, 40 years, being able to actively manage that property, whether it's fire or herbicide spraying, being able to get around the property is going to help whenever you get to a first thinning or second thinning. Having more roads to where the trucks and skidders can get around the property easier is going to get you a higher return off of your timber, because they're not having to make roads to get said timber back to the logging deck. So it's giving them benefit, it's giving you benefit, it's giving the wildlife benefit. It just works all around.
Yeah, and you've done a little bit of work with commercial, and so what about in the cases of those exploratory stages where somebody's considering, like, maybe I can rezone this, maybe I can put something into this, and then how do they go about that?
So strictly on more of a residential development side, I think Corey Bowe spoke to it previously.
Yes,
having your entitlements already in place, and the zoning aspect, because that is not trying to sell something or sell a tract that is, if these things are done, I get this price. It's showing the buyer, I have these things and that's why I want this price. So again, to me, being able to see the property is of great importance, mainly on a residential development side from a topography standpoint. If you have long range views and can see down a road a long way or down shooting lanes, whatever the case may be, or just strictly the understory being either mulched out or burned out, it allows developers to see that topography and be able to more easily envision, I can see this many houses coming in here. And so that's going to allow that higher density if your zoning's already appropriate. And all they're looking at is their bottom line in return. So how much can they get, how many houses or whatever they're developing can we get in here and maximize this property? when they can see that property, it makes it much easier to visualize everything.
So do I get to hit you with a rough question now? I'm just going to do it and see how you feel that actually. I'm just going to throw you on the spot here. So, we discussed a little bit of where land values we're not seeing the appreciation that we've seen for the last few years. And, some of those areas, we've seen land increases of 100%, 150% in 1 year, which is just, it's the kind of thing that's like, it's not sustainable, but it's just where the market's heading right now. And now what we're looking at is more of a plateau in markets. We're seeing land used more as a hedge on inflation. We're seeing land held or sold similar to the buying price. Do you sort of quantify what percentage increases that you can get out of certain land improvements? And is that something, is it just given on the area? Is it just given on, the particular buyer that you find for that land if you're looking to sell? Or do you have certain things that you're like, okay, if you do this to the road, you can usually look at like a 6% gain, something in that range? Or is it just sort of what the market will bear?
From a recreational standpoint and hunting standpoint, ideally still want to attract in the path of growth. In South Carolina, we're pretty lucky having 3 pretty strong markets in Greenville, South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina, and Charlotte, North Carolina. Columbia is smack in the center of the state with a major interstate leading to each. We're an hour and a half at the most from either one of those. So there's strong growth in pretty much any direction outside of Columbia. So on recreational type tracks, I would say about probably 20 or 25% of that cost is going to be very easily spread back out and spread across the entire acreage. So when you start adding 25%, $2,500, let's say a $10,000 investment, $2,500. Well, now you bump that out on the price per acre, you're magnifying it out very quickly. So that return is pretty strong. Plus, in the meantime, if you don't sell it, then you got the use of it. It's not like it's something that only another buyer is going to use. You're going to get your use out of it. Now, from a valuation standpoint, I 100% agree that everything's kind of plateaued out over the last, really since early 2020 through mid 2022. South Carolina, across the majority, was about a 23 to 24% growth in value year over year, which typically, in what we're seeing right around now, is back to about a 3 to 4%. It's not growing astronomically quick unless you're right in a very transitional area, and then have your correct entitlements, things of that nature. So it's gotten a lot different. Pretty much what I've seen in South Carolina over the majority is on tracks less than about 200 to 300 acres, your dirt value has about doubled since early 2020. In most areas, you were looking on larger tracks about $1,000 an acre, to where now you're looking $2,000 an acre pretty easily about anywhere for bare dirt. Did one good sized track right at the end of last year that was clear cut wall to wall. And all the trees that were on it was back on a river buffer, and that was it. And that went $2,200 an acre. And compared to early 2020, if you had even thought $2,200 an acre, you'd gotten laughed out of the room. You wouldn't have even had to say 22. If you thought it, people would have picked up on it and laughed you out. But going pretty easily now. And smaller tracks, same thing, just higher dollars, but the percentages being about the same.
Yeah, there is that kind of economy of scale where the smaller tracks per acre will kind of, you get more value with more land when you do it that way. You purchase those larger pieces. So if I'm hearing you right, the things that you want to really kind of dive into, whether you are a prospective buyer or a seller, is, the key here is access. Land that you can't access doesn't come to easy use, right? And then figuring out your goals even before that. Like you want access to it, but you also need a goal behind it. You can't just like grab a piece of land, throw some roads on it, and there you go. You want to think about the journey of the road. You want to think about the use of the land. You don't want to interfere with, your timber if you're trying to do that for a timber investment, or, same goes for farm, same goes for recreational. And then the other things that you want to do is sort of take care of the infrastructure, is look at, one, if you're looking to sell, you want to see, if there's zoning opportunities there. You want to see if there's a home site that's not yet developed that you're selling with the anticipation of someone building a home in a certain spot. Or how often do you see where somebody sells land and they leave the home site selection up to the buyer, and then they sort of fulfill that for the buyer during the transaction process? Is that very common?
I haven't seen it much. I have done a couple of that way. And usually that comes in the form of a credit to have it cleared.
Gotcha. That's what I was curious about.
Yeah, because otherwise you're just sitting there and without fail, the guy that's going to be doing your clearings, his tractor's going to be down or be on vacation or whatever it is. So we've done that a couple of times on a credit perspective at closing to give somebody that ability to put it where they want to. And that is kind of the downside. If you put the home site in at the beginning and have it tested, a lot of times buyer will want their house in a different spot. But what it still will do is it makes it easier to push that buyer at that point, if I'm on the selling side, to say, hey, we've already got this one done. We're still not going to allow the contingency of a septic testing because we already know this one does. We're all for you. If you want to test it and you can get it done quickly, go for it. But we're not allowing any extended period of time, because if you don't get it, somebody else is. Somebody else is going to be fine with where it is. So you can kind of customize it. Did a very similar thing a couple of years ago, using scale to split a property into three. And with those, we did allow the first couple buyers to say where they wanted it, because the owner had his own equipment and he could go do it.
Ah, that's helpful.
That made it very, very nice. They came in and said, I want it here and want it facing this way, or opening out this way, tapering that way. And he was able to go out and mulch it out for him. So that made it a lot easier to kind of give that customization aspect. And several times I have done a larger tract splitting up. We'll just say that it can be subdivided and let the first couple come in and say how much acreage they want and where they want, as long as what's left, the remaining puzzle pieces, so to speak, is something that we think is fine with. We'll carve it off based on what they want and then have more of a set plan on the remaining pieces. But so at times you can give that flexibility, and sometimes you can't. It's kind of really is a tract dependent and what you're working with, what you're that seller's goal is at that point for return. Can it be done? Can it not? One side note, survey is very good to have done, one in the beginning for any buyer, and then also specifically if you're going to be selling parcels off of a bigger piece, because of the timing that is associated with it. That can be 3 to 4 weeks on to 6, 8, sometimes even longer, on getting a survey at a good price. So having that already done is a big selling point as well, because generally, at least in South Carolina, the survey is a buyer cost. So if you've already done that, it allows you to push the price per acre up slightly, because that's a convenience factor, so to speak, that a buyer is not going to have to do. It allows you to push that price per acre up, and they say, no, I'm not willing to pay that price per acre. All right, that's fine. We'll come down on our price per acre, but you're giving us a credit back for this portion of the survey. Generally, they'll pay the higher price per acre. And if there's an issue on an appraisal because of that, we'll bring that point to their attention that this was already done. And then if we have to, revert back to what I just said, and we'll lower the price per acre, then we're just going to have a credit come back our way for giving you that convenience.
Gotcha. Okay. So so if I'm hearing this right, we are at a time where you're not going to walk into a property and nab it up and then just hold it for a short amount of time and then flip it. It's not, there's not going to be a ton of return there. And there are cases like there's always a diamond in the rough, right? But,
if you just get a steal at the beginning, it can work, but that doesn't happen a ton.
Yeah. So really, I mean, we're kind of like, we're at the elbow grease part of the economy, right? Where if you do want that quick return, you got to do some work. And depending on, they're outside of the larger scale improvements that you can make, you can select your home site, you can get the septic tested, you can get the roads put in. But there's also other strategies that you can implement, like getting it surveyed in advance just to eke out a little bit more return. There's a lot that kind of goes into this when you're evaluating this, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I find that interesting. Like it's sort of going from these seismic sort of increases that we've seen in the market to like, you're looking at a few dollars here and a few dollars there. And I always say in my house, I'll get like pastries in my house, and it makes my wife crazy because she goes by and like takes little bites out of it. I'm like, a lot of little bites equal big bites.
Might as well take it in one swoop.
Might as well go get your one. Yeah. So
I've got some other consultants that I've learned a lot from over the years in regards to doing things like this. We had a field day a couple of years ago that invited a bunch of my clients to come and see some of the different pieces of equipment in action, what they were doing, what the difference in just a dozer pushing a road in versus looks like compared to having some mulching done in an area, and then even taking it all the way to perspective of having a crew of guys doing a bunch of handwork, just chainsaws and pole saws just to open up a road that's already there through some good timber. So just limbing things up so the truck doesn't get scratched on the way by, or you're not having to slap the person in the face with a limb that you didn't hold on to long enough till they got there. Little things like that. But so from several guys, I've learned a ton of this stuff over the years and still try to get them incorporated when I can, because they're looking at it from here's the easiest way for us to do it and the best way for us to do it to be the most cost effective. Looking at the topography on a road, you don't want to be putting it on a road where water's going to be running down and start rutting your road out the whole way. And so you take it a different way, you're going to make it easier on your maintenance costs moving forwards. And then laying things out to where you can hunt 3 or 4 people at the same time, even on a relatively small track, because you're all shooting in different directions. So you got to be cautious of where you're aiming on things. So your food plots need to be in good areas from a safety perspective while hunting, and for the wildlife aspect, you want it to be where they're going to feel comfortable.
Yeah, and one thing I don't want to underserve here as we're talking about this is I kind of framed everything we just talked about in terms of that sort of, selling for profit at a certain point for somebody looking to make, those quick dollars, right? But the same applies to like a landowner that's like a legacy landowner. It's been in the family for 3 generations and they're finally looking to sell, and they've probably made improvements to it. And yeah, you could sell that property, and you could do that really easily, put it on the market, do that. But if you just put in that a little bit of extra work to make the right roads in the right way, to make sure that there's home sites already there, to make sure that it's surveyed, to do that legwork up front, like otherwise those are dollars you're leaving on the table. You could maximize your property's value before sale instead of just throwing the thing on the market. And if, I think everybody's objective is to maximize what they have. Those are things that everybody should do, right?
Mm-hmm. And get back on to the finance aspect of things. Let's say you've got a family farm that's been handed down several generations and you don't want to break that trend. You're not going to sell the family farm. What you can do is with those improvements, have a new appraisal done that allows you to borrow against, in a lot of aspects, borrow against that property, pledging it as collateral. And so having a land bank that understands valuations of these kind of properties, you can still leverage what you already have to go get other properties, whether that's to try to flip just to make money, or just for you to have another tract or another property to go to. You can leverage that property you got. And on a separate note on the financing aspect, if you know you're going to be doing a lot of these improvements, depending where your purchase price is, if it's low enough, you can a lot of times can have what's called an as-will-be appraisal performed, which will be incorporating the plans of what you're going to do to that property. And oftentimes we'll be able to leverage the bank's money to have those things done. Again, whether you're planning on reselling it or not, it still allows you to get some of those things done and factored in your financing to be able to get a lot more bang for your buck out of that property.
And we were jabbering there before we kicked the record button on, and you brought up another strategy that I just thought was fascinating, which was you have land in hand and maybe you just want to land in a different place to hunt, right? So throwing a 1031 exchange on it, but you were bringing up about not putting all your eggs in one basket as far as acquiring new land, as far as like selecting different parcels as opposed to one large parcel. I was wondering if you could talk me through that, just because I thought it was a really cool story.
Yeah, so that scenario is we're going through right now. I'm getting ready to put a property on the market, and they want to move the money through a 1031 exchange into some properties out of state. They probably will not go to as often as they do with the one that's 10 minutes away from the house, but in an area that generally has larger deer. And I was talking with another friend of mine with another company, and just kind of getting his 2 cents on this other area. And he said, when they're going to have a good chunk to spend, I would go in and get multiple properties in that area instead of just getting one, because in that area, chronic wasting disease is a lot more prevalent than in some other areas. So what that would do was allow you to have multiple pieces in one general area, so that they're able to have a higher chance of being able to hunt whenever they want it, even if there's an outbreak that makes it to where they can't hunt as much on that property. If you only have one property and that's ground zero, so to speak, of that issue, you may not be able to use it even though you have it. But if you have things in a relative area, you have a higher chance of still being able to use those properties and get enjoyment off of at least one of them. Generally, for something like that, when you're going out of state anyway, you're going to be up there for a good little bit of time, and you're going to want to go see other things. And so if you have multiple properties, and allows you to change your scenery when you're hunting, you can hunt each property a different day. So give everybody, or all hunt each property the same day, just in different spots and different people. So it allows you a lot more flexibility. And you're then at that point casting a larger net on the ability to resell those properties. Somebody comes along and that's the perfect track. Well, you might be able to sell that one and pick up the neighboring piece to one of the others if it sounds better, or just get another smaller piece somewhere.
Yeah, and the whole 1031 exchange process adds complexity to that, because you have 40 days to select the properties that you want to get from the sale. Is that
the timings get tough? And yeah. So talking with somebody that understands 1031s very explicitly is great. You can do reverse 1031s in which you buy the second property first, but that is a little bit more convoluted. So need to be able to have a tax accountant, preferably, that's going to be able to help go through that. This is really the best thing that you can do is have the right team around you that understands all the different ins and outs. And one other thing we can just add in, a lot of these improvements are going to be able to be deducted from your capital gains at the end as well. So there's a return aspect that you are able to get on a tax savings basis. So your overall net return is going to be impacted by these, even if it's only from a deduction standpoint. It's something that you're going to be able to put the money in. And I always tell everybody, keep any receipts you have. If they don't have a receipt, get them to give you one. I mean, to make something that can be very rudimentary, but need to see an exchanging of money for a service rendered, so that can be deducted from a capital appreciation aspect on the property.
Also extremely valuable to keep in mind is if you are making these improvements, they can be tax deductible.
Yep. And a lot don't think about it, and oftentimes they'll do the work themselves. Having a good attorney, or not attorney, accountant that can break down and say what a fair market value of what you did from a sweat equity standpoint, what of that can be written off. If you have it in LLC, you can write off your mileage to and from the property, but all of that needs to go through an accountant that does the ins and outs of these all day, every day. So again, from the team aspect of it, I always want to get that referred to somebody that is a true professional on it, and make sure that everybody can work together on that to get those goals achieved. You're saying you don't want to do this on TurboTax? I wouldn't, no. I would not. Yeah, I agree. Well, hey, Nick, just want to thank you for your time. I want to make sure that we hold you to your hour here so you can get back to your day. So hey, you work out of South Carolina. Tell me the area that you work in. At this point, I've bounced all around the states. I'm the primary agent around Chester County, York County, Kershaw, Lancaster, Chesterfield are all my primary areas. And then at that point, I kind of do bounce around from there with a lot of clients in overlapping areas. We'll help in different areas as needed. So anything I can do in South Carolina, I'm willing to. I've done stuff pretty much probably about 80% of the counties at this point. So I have connections all around and work with a lot of different agents, both with National Land and with other companies. So I have a strong network on being able to get things done when I need to in different areas.
And I think it's very clear that you know your stuff. So it's very obvious that landowners in your area need to reach out to you to work with a good consultant on their land. And additionally, these are great tips for every single landowner or potential buyer out there to sort of maximize value and to look at what they can do to land before they purchase it to analyze if they can bring value to the table if they are looking to sell. These are all extremely valuable tips. So, hey, I appreciate your time, man. This is great information for people, and it's much appreciated.
Likewise, enjoyed it and appreciate the time as well. And look forward to seeing how everything pans out.
Yeah, we'll do it again.
Definitely.
This concludes episode number 37 for the National Land Realty Podcast with land professional Nicholas Ardis discussing land improvements to maximize your land value. You can learn more about land ownership and the buying and selling of land at nationalland.com.